How's it going, fam? Welcome back to Erica's EDC, and today we have a really exciting video about microstructure in blades. Guys, this is a video that I wanted to make because I've seen a lot of videos on YouTube in regard to steel composition, metallurgy, how it all works, microstructure, blade geometry, all of the things. But a lot of that content can be a little tricky to digest because a lot of these people are like too smart for their own good, and they kind of just talk at you about the facts, and it's super hard to understand at times. So I wanted to make kind of a video for dummies, if you will, and I am included in that dummy category. I wanted to make a video that was just a little easier to understand and talk about steel and microstructure and all that stuff. So we are in the truck today. It is crazy cold up, but this is the only place that I have to film, so here we are. But this is going to be a podcast type video, so sit back, relax, grab a beer, grab your closest mom. Let's get into it. So, in the world of knives and steel, there are so many different kinds of steel that we use in knives. We have things like Rex 121 that is made by Crucible, and this is the highest edge retention steel. We have steels like 8670, which are extremely tough. 8670 is the toughest steel that you can currently get, I believe. And there are so many things in between. And generally speaking, with knife steel, you are always, in a sense, compromising something. However small it may be, there's generally a little bit of a compromise, whether it's edge stability or toughness or corrosion resistance, so on and so forth. But there are so many different blade steels, and the most important thing, in my opinion, is geometry. Above what type of steel it is, above heat treat, above everything, geometry to me is the most important factor. Now, following right after that would be heat treat, and I would put microstructure in with the heat treat because they kind of come hand in hand. So today we're going to specifically talk about microstructure, what that is, and how it affects a knife's performance, okay? So if we take a knife and we look at the label, right? So this is CPM Rex 121. If you think about it, the name of the steel is really just a label that has been applied to the composition of this particular steel, right? So Rex 121 consists of a composition that gives us extreme edge retention, not really great toughness, and not really great corrosion resistance. And it also consists of very specific percentages of, like, vanadium or niobium or chromium or all of the things, right? That each steel has a very specific composition, very specific percentage of certain elements, okay? But depending on the recipe that you use to process the steel, the heat treat, you can actually almost, in essence, control and maneuver the microstructure of that composition. And I want to give kind of a crude analogy of how that works, okay? Because the microstructure, the way that the steel ends up being after heat treat and after quenching and after all of the things, tempering, all of that stuff, the microstructure that you are left with can really determine how the steel is going to work, right? Because the label only goes so far. That Rex 121 label, and this being the best edge retention steel, is really just scratching the surface of how it's going to perform, okay? So I'm going to give a crude analogy here that I kind of thought of. And like I said, this is literally so crude, but just to paint a dummy picture of how this works. So, let's say that we're making chocolate chip cookies, okay? And we have 3 different batches. They're all going to have the same exact ingredients at the same measurements, but it's how those ingredients are put in and mixed that's going to affect the final outcome. So let's say batch 1 has, we're making the batch of cookie dough, and it's got all the ingredients, the sugar, the flour, the salt, the whatever, right? And as we're stirring all of those ingredients very well, we're putting the chocolate chips in, then stirring it around, putting more of the chocolate chips in, stirring it around until we use up all of the chocolate chips, okay? So it's very well mixed, and our chocolate chips are distributed evenly amongst the ingredients. Let's say our second batch, we just dump the whole bag in and just quickly stir it all up, right? So maybe we have more chocolate chips in one part of the batter than the rest. And then the third mix, we put all the ingredients in except for the chocolate chips. And then at the end, when it's on the baking sheet, we just put the chocolate chips on top, okay? Like let's pretend we're not doing independent cookies. It's a chocolate chip cookie dough mix that we're just putting flat, okay? I'm trying to paint a picture here. So the last batch, we just take the chocolate chips, although it's the same amount as the other two batches, we just kind of dump them all over, okay? And they tend to kind of collect into the middle of the batter. Now we bake all of them. Now remember, they all have the same exact ingredients, the same amount of ingredients, and they're all being cooked for the same amount of time. However, when you take out the first batch, in theory, it should have pretty good integrity, right? Because those chocolate chips are evenly distributed throughout the mix, and you should have a pretty dang good cookie at the end that has a nice balance of everything. The second batch might be a little spotty, right? Because we kind of just quickly whipped it all together. We did not take the time to allow the ingredients to disperse properly. So that one's going to be a little shoddy, right? Not the worst, but not the best. And the third batch is a complete mess. So we have all the chocolate chips that have collected into the middle, and as it baked, the chocolate is all melted, right? So when you technically go to cut this up, this giant cookie, when you go to cut it up, the cookies in the middle are going to have zero integrity, zero support, because all that chocolate has melted and there's nothing, the rest of the ingredients aren't holding it together, right? So even though all three batches have the same exact ingredients, the same amount of chocolate chips, and they were cooked at the same time, we still have differences with the end product because of the way the structure, the ingredients of the cookie dispersed, I guess, right? So that's like a super crude way of imagining what happens when we essentially bake blade steel, right? Because it's kind of the same thing. You follow a recipe, a heat treat protocol, and you essentially bake the steel during heat treat. You're essentially cooking it at a high temperature, then taking it out and cooling it very quickly, generally at a very, very, very cold temperature, sub-zero. And then maybe you put it back in the oven and you take it back out or whatever, right? We have oil quenching steels. We have air quenching steels. We're not going to get that far into it today. But when you heat treat a knife, it is essentially baking the steel, right? And depending on how you bake it and how long and how you go about it, it can determine what the microstructure of the steel ends up looking like. And obviously we're talking about on a microscopic level, okay? Microstructure. We need water. We're getting into this. So, like I said, the label of the steel only brings you so far. The heat treat is what is actually going to determine how that microstructure comes together in the end. Now, the other thing is, during this entire process of taking an annealed state steel, a raw organic steel, and then heat treating it, and then tempering it, and all of the things, and quenching it, you're also going through an evolution. You're going through a series of very specific transitions. And those transitions, depending on how abruptly or how slowly they are being introduced into the protocol, that can determine your final microstructure, right? So we all know that your carbide size and your types of carbides will end up affecting what you have as your final outcome, right? Like, for instance, this knife here is in S45VN. That is a powder metallurgy steel made by Crucible, and just the powder metallurgy process in general makes carbides smaller, okay? So there are so many aspects of this this protocol that can, on a microscopic, very detailed level, change how our chemical composition is oriented within the steel. Now, I want to show a very specific example of this that I have just recently experienced, because this is really cool, okay? I have two knives here in CPM S45VN, okay? We have a Chris Reeve small Sebenza 31 here, and we have the heavyset tactical 3-inch belt knife, we're calling it so far, because there's not an actual name for it yet. They're both in CPM S45VN, right? They both followed a beautiful heat treat protocol, but S45, like other steels, has a number of different recipes, I guess you can call it, protocols that you can follow to obtain certain characteristics out of that steel. Now, you can only go so far with this, right? Because it's not like you can do a special heat treat protocol that's going to literally change the chemical composition of the steel. You cannot change that. What you can change, like I said, is how those elements within the steel are arranged, okay? So, this S45VN here blew my socks off when I tried it. John told me that he followed an updated recipe, we'll call it, for S45VN. This is 62.5 to 63 HRC, and this knife does not feel like S45VN. Why? Because a lot of production S45VN is very glassy. I've talked about this 100 times on the channel. S45VN is a type of steel that has a very fine grain structure, okay? So what can happen with S45 is if you take it above, let's say, 600 grit DMT, generally speaking, the edge will be sharp, but it won't be toothy, okay? It won't be grabby and toothy and aggressive. It tends to smooth and glass out because that grain refinement within the microstructure is so, it's so refined. It's so, how do I say it? It ends up being very glassy, okay? So generally speaking, with S45VN, I like to keep it at most 600 DMT finish on that edge. That way it has a little bit of that aggressive bite, because if you start to polish it, it'll just glass out and you won't have an aggressive edge. Until I used this S45VN, okay? Now, I will say geometry always is part of this process, right? And I am using geometry as an umbrella statement here to encompass a number of things. The thinness of the literal stock, the blade grind, the behind the edge thickness, and the degrees per side that the edge is sharpened at. That is, I'm just using geometry as an all-encompassing term here, okay? So, this Chris Reeve knife does not have the convex edge that it came with because I have sharpened it. But if I were to guess, it's probably 20 degrees per side, okay? I generally run my Chris Reeves at 15 degrees per side. That's where I get the best performance, but I already have videos on that. This one is probably 20 degrees per side, give or take, okay? And I don't know, maybe 20 BTE. I'm not really sure. Hollow ground, though. This knife is 17 degrees per side, okay? So it has a really laid back edge. See how much thicker that bevel is compared to this one? There we go. This edge is laid back more than the other one. So that's already giving us a cutting advantage over this because that edge is laid back so far. Now, the real beauty comes into the heat treat in the microstructure. So not only do we have an edge that's laid back that's going to make cutting way more efficient, we also have an updated heat treat protocol that allowed that microstructure to be more efficient in the end than this, okay? So this knife is so toothy, it is so aggressive, and the edge is lasting so much longer than typical S45 that I've used, most likely because the recipe that John used for this knife allowed those elements to come together and form into the carbides, for the carbides to form in a specific manner that is advanced over what is allowed in a production knife setting. You have to remember, in a production knife setting, multiple blades are being done all at the same time. The timing on when they are put in the oven and taken out and maybe cryoed, or, you know, put in the plates and done with the air hose or whatever the fuck. This is going to be a way less structured process than a custom knife. You know what I'm saying? Because you really are on a time crunch with production knives, and they're done in large batches, and you're trying to kind of just get through it all. And companies don't have time to do knives one by one by one, right? That would be impossible to demand of production companies because they have so many knives to make. They're done in batches, and your knife is not going to get that attention to detail and that special recipe that a custom knife is generally going to get, okay? So even though they're both S45 VN, they're both around the same hardness, the custom done better recipe S45 VN is performing like it's not S45 VN. It actually feels more like MagnaCut in use, which people will say you can't notice a difference. On Erica's planet, I can actually notice a difference. Now, if you were to give me 3 knives unlabeled, and you gave me MagnaCut 64 HRC, Nitro V 65 HRC, and AEBL 65 HRC, and they were all the same stock thickness and geometry and degrees per side and BTE, and you told me to cut with them, would I be able to tell the difference? Maybe not. That's a pretty close comparison. But generally speaking, when you have a vast difference, you can actually notice the difference in the level of aggressiveness on the edge, the level of corrosion resistance, the level of cutting performance and efficiency with a keen mind. And if you pay attention to these things, you actually truly can notice a difference if you're obsessed with knives like I am, okay? The general person is not going to notice a difference. But for me, all of the S45 that I have used from Chris Reeve, Benchmade, Spyderco, Bark River, Spartan, all of it has been more on the subpar end of performance. Whereas with this knife, like I said, it is so bitey, so aggressive. The edge retention is lasting so much longer, it feels like a different steel. It feels like a way more high performance steel. I would actually go as far to say it's performing like 10V. That's what it feels like. 10V, MagnaCut. I know that those two are not comparable, but I'm choosing a stainless, I'm choosing a high alloy here to kind of give you some examples. There's no low alloy steel that even feels like. I hope that you're understanding what I'm saying here, because I'm probably all over the map. My point is, the label of the steel is only scratching the surface of how the knife is going to perform. And if you have someone who is making custom knives or bringing in a custom heat treat protocol, you can get totally different characteristics out of a steel compared to the general public using the general public version of the steel. And this was really my first time experiencing that. S45 is not one of my favorite steels. Don't get me wrong, it has good corrosion resistance for sure, it has good edge retention, and it has good toughness for what it is. The steels that Crucible went through to get to this point, I think we did like 440C, then 154 CM, then maybe something else, S30V, S35V, and S45VN, and then MagnaCut. This has gone through so many iterations to improve. S45 wasn't really that impressive to me until now. You know what I'm saying? Like, it was kind of just another tab put into Crucible's evolution until I experienced it at this level. And I really do think it is in credit to the way John did the heat treat on this. He used a different heat treat than you're probably getting from a production setting. Therefore, I'm experiencing the chemical composition of S45VN in a manner that I've never experienced before because of that microstructure. It really is important. And I know people are going to tear me a new one for this and say I'm ridiculous and none of that is real and you can't tell a difference and a steel is a steel is a steel. But on Erica's planet, I really do think that heat treat and the way that you introduce that heat treat to the steel and your timing and everything that you do, I genuinely do believe it can adjust the microstructure within the steel to either be lesser or better. You can't change the chemical composition. It is the way it is. But you can arrange the carbides and the way they form and how they attach and the percentage of RA. You can, on a minor scale, control that to a point and toy around with that microstructure. In my opinion, I am not a metallurgist. I am not a scientist. I'm just an idiot in New Hampshire that loves knives. So take what I say with a grain of salt. I truly do believe you can adjust how all of those elements come together and bind depending on how you go about the protocol. And like I said, that cookie thing was a totally crude analogy there, but I'm just trying to get you to envision in your head kind of how that works. Like, you have to kind of imagine when this blank gets put into the even heat or whatever oven they're using, you have to imagine like a cookie baking and forming and how the ingredients are all coming together and binding for your final outcome. You know what I'm saying? It really can be adjusted on a minor scale. So anyway, that was my nerdy video for today. I am like shaking. I am so cold. It is, I think, 9 degrees here in New Hampshire. Not sure what it is with the wind chill, but I just wanted to make that video because, like I said, the label of the steel is only scratching the surface of what you're going to get. We are going to be given a scientific, listing of characteristics that will be applied to the steel, but you can so adjust that with heat treat and geometry, especially geometry, guys. I cannot drive that home enough. Geometry is the most important part of a knife, and that can literally dictate how the knife is going to perform no matter what it's made for. You can really play around with the grind and the degrees per side and the BTE and achieve very specific characteristics depending on what that geometry is. Okay, so if you have a knife that is not performing as you want it to, let's say you have S45VN that you also find is glassy, right? Maybe you use your knife and it dulls very quickly, okay? And it works well for food, but it won't bite cardboard and rope. You cannot change the composition. It is already heat treated, so you can't change that either. But what you can do is maybe lay your edge back, and it's going to cut better for longer, right? That's something you can do. And you can also choose what grit you finish your edge at, okay? To allow those carbides maybe to cut a little bit better, or maybe you're kind of unleashing certain aspects of that chemical composition to do its thing, you know? So think about that when you have a knife that is performing poorly. You can't change the whole thing, but you can at least lay your edge back, or if you need more toughness, you know, make it a little more obtuse, and just experiment, I guess is what I'm saying. Experiment with your knives, play around with degrees per side and final grits, okay? And yeah, I just wanted to nerd out about that today. But thank you guys so much for watching. Thank you for listening. I hope that you enjoyed that. Yeah, I think that's it. Happy Sunday, guys. Go use your shit. Learn how to sharpen your knives. I will see you guys on the next video. I love you so much, fam. Take care. Also, if I don't see you before Christmas, happy holidays, Merry Christmas. If you don't celebrate that, just have a good day. I love you guys so much. Take care.